Hello YouTube, Infinite Magicraid community, Gandalf here. The number one question I get asked most often is always around how do I build a specific hero. If I were to go around to make a guide on every hero, how to build it, it will be a lot of content, but it would be very difficult to find. As one of the mandate I gave myself is when it comes to helping the player base, it's about teaching everyone how to fish rather than handing over a lot of fish for people. So I hope through this short video, you will understand how the damage formula works, which in essence will teach you how to build every single hero. When it comes to thinking about where the damage comes from, there's really three key parts you want to think about. One is what is the primary attribute it scales off? Is it attack based, defense based, or HP based? Then are there ways I can increase the direct damage or the dot damage depending on what kind of hero this is? And finally, is majority of the damage coming from its skill or is it coming from its basic damage? Understanding these three parts of every hero will know how to prioritize your stats. And these three numbers multiply together. So it's important to make sure that you spread it out evenly across all three to maximize the total product of these three values. The first part is about the primary attribute. It doesn't matter if it's direct damage or one of the dot damages to the right. All of them will scale off either attack, defense, or HP. So that will be the primary attribute to focus on. For direct damage, you need to think about critical damage as well. So that means you will also need to hit 100% crit rate, as that's probably the most valuable return for any sort of direct damage dealer, unless there's some sort of mechanic for guaranteeing critical hits. Then you want to really maximize critical damage from there. For most heroes, generally from a scaling perspective, critical damage often is slower to hit diminishing return than your primary attribute when it comes to building up your hero. Just purely from gear rolls and all sorts of stat distributions. Critical damage, if you can get subs on it, is usually worth a little bit more. So you're very asking yourself, do I want 4.7 on an attack stat, or I want another 4.7 on a critical damage. By the way, these are the maximum artifact and gear rolls you can have on substat. Usually prefer the one over critical damage. Then finally, there is a penetration and sort of a direct damage mitigation formula, which every hero's attack actually matters towards this. So that's why attack down is so effective against direct damage, because it actually reduces the enemy's damage, because the attack stat is always used, even if they're defense or HP scaling. On the dot damage side is a lot easier. It just scales purely off of mastery. And right now there is only one hero in the game that kind of, or maybe I'm sure there's more in the future. So I'm sure the mastery resistance stat will eventually come into game in a much more accessible way. The one top of mind is Wukong has this unique passive that can increase the team's mastery resistance, which means you just need more mastery on your side to overcome that, to be able to scale off of mastery. So generally when you build your hero, mastery scales a lot more than the primary stat. However, we have seen a lot of heroes that have built in a huge amount of mastery for themselves. So for example, recently like Muron, where he converts, I think, up to 160 free mastery into himself. We see that in French. We see that in multiple heroes where over time their own mastery increases drastically. In those situations, it might be worth it a lot more to perhaps focus a little bit more on the primary stat than the mastery stat. Of course, we also see heroes that increase their primary stat a lot as well. In those cases, it's worth a lot more to invest more into the mastery stat. So you do have to play by ear a little bit depending on what hidden mechanics or internal mechanics those heroes have. The next part is the damage multipliers, and this is probably easier to understand because it's just really one number. There are some buffs like enfeebleness or consolidation that directly say, they increase the direct damage taken or reduce the damage taken. Like similarly on the On the dot damage side, it's easy to understand, increasing damage versus reducing damage. These dot or direct damage multipliers is a class on its own. So that's why often if you can get these stats, they usually have a lot less diminishing return, because often off of your base stats, you're like usually 300-400 time multiplier already, but it's really rare to see these multipliers from a damage type perspective. So that's why from a blessing perspective, often if you can get like a plus 10 on direct damage, that's probably worth a lot more than getting like a plus 20% on attack percent or plus 20% on crit damage. So that's why these are actually quite valuable when it comes to increasing the direct damage type multiplier. Likewise, the other one is when it comes to figuring out whether damage primarily comes from skill damage or basic damage. Now, these are usually less helpful if the damage is split. So the hero does a lot on its first basic skill and also does a lot on the skill damage as well. It probably worth a little bit less to invest in this if the damage seems to be split between these two parts. But if the majority of the damage comes from one type, for example, Indra mostly comes from basic attack. So building a lot more basic attack into the hero is more valuable. So here is sort of like, for example, picking Indra. Is it better to pick, a plus 10.5% internal injury versus, plus 10.5 on the basic attack? Well, it's actually equal in this case because, in fact, it's actually a little bit better because there's a little bit that I think it's tiny bit of it is direct damage. So there are heroes that have mixed damage between direct damage and dot damage. Those are the times where you want to pick more things that scales of skill versus basic. So pick more buffs in this category because you have more return on the overall kit. While if you have a hero that has more of a split between basic and skill damage, maybe it's better to focus on the damage tag. So focus more on increasing the direct damage or the dot damage type. So hopefully this video has been helpful in terms of how to prioritize your stats and building it out. Looking very carefully at the damage description to see if it's split, looking at how much of the damage scaling comes from the basic skill versus the skill attack. That will help you picking your multipliers and what to pick in terms of building up from these two perspectives. Again, all of these numbers multiply together, so make sure you evenly distribute your stats across all three categories. Hopefully that helped you, and I'll catch you in the next one. Gandalf out.